that's as educational as it is entertaining. Welcome to Pleasure Pulse, your weekly guide to the world of sex education. Join Roma every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. exclusively on Zolized Radio 96.1 FM. It's the perfect way to spice up your midweek routine and get answers to all your burning questions. Whether you're looking for relationship advice or curious about the art of intimacy, Roma's got you covered. Pleasure Pulse, every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Only on Zolized Radio 96.1 FM. Don't miss out. Your sex education journey starts this Tuesday with Roma as your guide.
Welcome to another episode of Pleasure Pulse. We're joined today by my guest, whom I'll allow to introduce himself in a bit. Actually, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody now? They can probably already see you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. But I thought you were going to do the introduction.
No, I like my guests to introduce themselves because who better to speak about yourself than you?
All right. So my name is Davin Francis, and I am currently a counselor at the National Counseling Center. I also wear the hat of a doctoral student. For the past 3 years, I've been pursuing a PhD in clinical psychology at Jackson State University in Mississippi. And so at the end of that, then I will transition from a counselor to a clinical psychologist. Personally, I like to boast about this. I'm from the proud and wonderful village of St. Paul's, born and raised. I like to talk about it because I believe coming from there was very instrumental into what I am today. My experiences and my desire to do a lot in the field of mental health.
You know, I thought when you said you like to boast about it and you're very proud of it, that you're going to say that you're a St. Paul's fan. Not that you're from St. Paul's, but that you're a St. Paul's football fan.
Yeah.
That too.
Yeah, well, being from there, you would know I'm a very, very big fan of
St. Paul's.
Of SL Hospital St. Paul Football Club.
Okay.
The 7 times champion, might I say that? Most championships. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm proud of everything St. Paul's.
Okay. Got you. Thank you for joining me tonight. I think I've been asking you to come on the show for a while, and I know the conversations have often been, you know, like not your expertise not being in the area of sex. Mm-hmm. And my guests know that I like to talk about sex. That's what the show is about. But I like to think about sex as bigger than just the, you know, mechanics and literal act of sex, right? So I like to talk about relationships, I like to talk about communication, I like to talk about intimacy, about building connection beyond sex. So I thought, you know, a psychological perspective, which I've had before, you know, in the person of Andrea James Watley, who's been on the show a few times. I think it's so interesting and fascinating sometimes to get into people's heads, right? Like to get to understand what is the person and the psychology behind the decisions that are being made and so on. But anyways, before we get into the show, I'd just like to thank you all for your patience as I was out enjoying life. I think that's what I said I was going to do, and I encouraged you to go out and do the same as well. I went on a little trip and saw a few places and ate good food and had good company. And I hope that you also took the time to, you know, reconnect with those close to you, or if you didn't, that you are still planning to. So let's jump right into tonight's conversation. Also, thank you for, you know, being patient as we had a few technical difficulties, but we'll get into tonight's conversation. So I wanted to talk about, you know, as a man, you are a counselor, and I know you also had clients who were in relationships with each other. So I was always like, no, you're like perfect for the show because I want to hear some of the insights. As much as you can generalize from some of those conversations, because I feel like we don't talk about sex really as much as we should and in the ways that can be most productive. And we also don't talk about relationships as well, and we don't often talk in our relationships either. So I wanted to talk about, I'll focus this conversation on men in relationships, men, the psychology of men, men's needs, how men can go about being better communicators to their partners. I know a lot of times, like, men's desires, okay, it's weird, right? Because I feel like the act of sex oftentimes, more often than not, like, privileges men, right? Like, it centers around men's enjoyment. But sometimes it seems like men are less able to communicate, like, what they want in relationships and in, out of their sexual encounters and experiences and so on. So can you tell me about what some of the common misconceptions are when it comes to men's emotional needs in relationships?
Yeah, well, broadly speaking, the biggest one that comes to mind is the word that you just used, emotional need. A common myth is that men are not emotional, and so that is not true. The research shows that men are actually emotional creatures, just like women, but the difference is they might display their emotional needs in different ways, or they might struggle with a lack of knowing how to display their emotional needs. And so there's this tendency in society, or misconception, to think, to socialize our boys from a very young age to act tough. And so when they grow up and they become men, there's this general misconception that men don't get emotional, but in actuality we do.
Yeah, I feel like in addition to that misconception that men don't get emotional, there's also the belief that men shouldn't be emotional. So it's like, men shouldn't cry, they shouldn't, and it's interesting because, like, sometimes I'm like, it's about men crying, but I feel like even other types of emotions men are discouraged from showing. So if a man is, like, too eager or too happy about something that they shouldn't be, like, exuberant about, there's also, a critique or an evaluation or assessment of that emotion. So, like, I don't know if you watched, and I didn't really follow, like, the Democratic Convention, but I happened to watch the night when Tim Walz's son was, like, in the audience when his son was speaking, and he was like, "That's my dad," and he was, like, crying because he was so excited about his dad, and you could really tell that he loves and appreciates his father. And then, of course, after that, there was a slew of media that was just like, this is not how real men should behave and things like that. So it was like, he wasn't even expressing, like, sadness, It was like, it was love, it was appreciation, and that was a problem too. So I find that also very interesting, how it's not even just, like, sadness, but also, like, you like, all emotions kind of have to be, like, like, you have to be just neutral about everything. Like, what effect have you seen that have on people's relationships, like, from your clients, if you can say, or is it not something you really noticed?
Yeah, I haven't noticed that in the clients that I've come across, because I do dabble in couples therapy, but just to piggyback on what you said, Yeah, even in our society, where we have certain views, you see a man or a group of men displaying happy tendencies, and immediately we tend to
they're happy.
Yeah, we tend to believe that something is wrong with them, or as we would say, they look off. My son, funny enough, when I told him I was coming here tonight, he told me to talk about him. Yeah, he told me to talk about him, and so what I was gonna say is that even me as a mental health professional in my personal life, as I grow as a dad, sometimes I have to check myself based on how I was socialized. And so many times I would have to check myself when my son is emotional, and sometimes allow him to be. Because, growing up as boys, we're told that we're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to appear in that way because that makes us look soft. And because of that, in relationships, you have many men who wear this tough exterior, and you have women who struggle to get through to them because they appear as a wall, they appear as brick, and so the onus is on us as parents to begin the process of changing that with the new generation of boys that we have now. And also changing the notion that absolutely nothing is wrong with that.
And I feel like it's so, and I'm going to bring it back to like sex and relationships, because that's what I do, because vulnerability and like that level of openness and honesty are so key to having successful relationships, right? Like, even when we talk about having sex, like, there has to be, especially when it comes to like giving feedback or talking about desires, there has to be that level of emotional self-awareness, emotional understanding, vulnerability, openness, to be able to hear what someone is saying and feeling about the situation, and receive that in productive or healthy ways, and not respond either with violence or defensively, because I think that also happens as well. So I think, sometimes, like, I feel like in the moment when we are raising boys and having these conversations, we're not thinking about 20 years from now when they're living on their own and navigating their own relationships, how hardening them will affect them later. But it's, it also makes it difficult for them to be able to express, okay, what are their needs, because they've been told, like, not to have needs, or not to have certain needs, not to have certain emotions, don't build closeness, and all of those things. So how do you think men can, even all of us who have been raised to, set aside our emotions, how do you think men can effectively, or learn how to effectively communicate their desires and boundaries to their partners?
Okay. Well, before I answer that, one of the things I'm always mindful of too, because I know at times, and I've said it. I said it a few minutes ago. We like to talk about how the current generation of men were raised, and one of the things that is important to note is that the parents at the time, they didn't have the proper resources. The parents at the time
did the best they could.
Right, they did the best they
with
could.
What they had.
And they didn't have access to not just proper mental health care, but just knowledge in general, and knowing what to do to foster a positive environment where boys are allowed to express themselves emotionally. And so I think that in this current generation, where I believe that we have more access to information, we have more access to education, I think that it is our duty to begin it from early. So you ask that question, how can men do that? I'm firstly talking about those men who are fathers, who are uncles. Begin to foster that environment in the little boys so that they can grow to be more emotional. And then just for themselves, you talk about the difficulties, you spoke about the difficulties with being vulnerable with their partners. That is something that I've observed in a few of my sessions where men struggle with that. I remember I had one or two couples where it started out with just the female coming because the male wasn't comfortable with being in a forum such as counseling, expressing their feelings, and it had to take some time. You had to take some patience, and over time, once they became comfortable, they recognized that nothing is wrong with doing that. And so I'm saying that we have to start that level of awareness where we know that nothing is wrong with expressing your emotion, fostering an environment or a relationship where you begin to get comfortable with being sensitive, learning to talk about your most vulnerable situations and needs with your partner, learning to be intimate, because intimacy doesn't necessarily involve sex. It just means being able to be there for your partner in different aspects, whether it is psychological, emotional, physical, learning to do all of those aspects, and again leading the way with that, and just making yourself comfortable enough to be there for your partner.
I think we might I feel like those are great suggestions. I'm thinking, and maybe we can also come to this later on in the show, and we can also provide some resources, and give people some tangible-ish actions that they can take as well, because I feel like that sounds so big for somebody who is like just starting at zero. So I'm like, where would you recommend somebody start who is starting at zero? So like the toughest of tough guys who has not expressed like in words and emotion, because I feel like men express emotions like anger, frustration, and so on all the time, and that's like the acceptable emotion that they can express. But like a man who wants to say, I just want to be held sometimes, or I just want to cuddle sometimes, or I don't know how to tell my girlfriend that I like to receive flowers. Like where does somebody like that start?
I would say open communication.
How do you start to open your mouth to communicate if you've never done it before?
So it's funny. I had a conversation with a friend last night with something unrelated, but I think it somewhat relates to this. And I like to use this in therapy a lot. Making yourself uncomfortable so that you can be comfortable, and so it means having an open mind. As I said, I know you said that. I know you said that some of that seems as if it's starting big, but I don't necessarily think so, because to get to that point, you have to be honest and face the discomfort from the get-go, and so make yourself uncomfortable. You're not comfortable with expressing your emotions, but do it in small ways, like telling your partner, this is how I feel.
And can you send a text, like maybe you're not ready for the face-to-face, you can
and just use clear and concise language. As I said, this is how I feel about this situation. this is something that I think I would want from you, to be comfortable in the relationship. And it's not going to be easy at first, but once you do it over and over again, then it becomes your norm, because that is how the process works.
Yeah. And I think, and you would probably attest to it, right? To like how much communication can improve relationships, sexual or non-sexual. So it's like you enjoy the discomfort of saying it, because usually, like, at least I've found from my own, experiences, because I don't get myself worked up about saying certain things as well. And oftentimes the person receives it first of all, and receives it so well that it's like, oh, it was really just bigger in my...
Why was I worrying about it?
It was really just bigger in my head. Like, it doesn't always work out like that, but I feel like most reasonable people are just so happy that you opened up, that you said something, because then that gives both of you an opportunity to improve whatever it is. Is that like what you found too, that like actually men communicating? So when the men finally come to therapy or counseling, how does that change the dynamic in the relationship?
So you hit the nail on the head.
I should be a counselor.
Yeah, maybe you should. Communication, I find, even more than love, is probably the most important aspect in any relationship.
Interesting.
Because if you can have love, but if you don't have proper communication,
and if you don't communicate that love too,
right?
Yes.
Right. If you don't communicate that love, or you don't have proper communication in general, where does the relationship go from there? And so many a times I would have had sessions with couples, and I like to use analogies again, and I would find, hypothetically, they're trying to get to ZIZ. They want to get to ZIZ, but they have different ways and means in their head about how they want to do it, and they're not communicating it effectively. They're not meeting each other halfway, and so that is what creates a lot of confusion. And so, to minimize the confusion, you have to communicate in any, not even in just intimate relationships, in any relationship that you are part of. And so, as you interjected, and I like that you did, by saying you have to know how to communicate. You have to communicate your love. Again, you have to make yourself uncomfortable to be comfortable with doing that for your partner, so that the relationship can be positive one in general.
So we've actually, I sent you a bunch of questions. And we kind of covered a few of them. Actually, we talked about how societal expectations, around boys and masculinity, boyhood, and so on, can affect men in relationship and their openness and vulnerability and so on. We had also talked about how childhood experiences, how you're raised, can shape a man's approach. What would you say are some of those barriers? Because I want you to answer. Like, I have some in my head, but what would you say are some of the barriers that prevent men, aside from masculinity, from expressing vulnerability in romantic relationships?
Yeah, but I think that's
the main one.
Yeah, that's the biggest one, and it trickles down. It trickles down to other areas. If we're even going to go back to biblical times, it promotes the theme of masculinity, the theme that the man has to be tough, the man always has to lead. And so if you're promoting all of these, then you're not giving him ample space and opportunity to be emotional, to express himself clearly in the relationship, because the man is seen as always having to protect, and yes, that is true, but with that there is no time to foster a relationship where he's able to properly express himself.
And also it's like in relationship, people always advise that you bring your whole self to it, not piece of a self, not half of self, but like your whole self. And so if men are like constantly told like only bring some emotions and not others, they're not bringing their whole selves to that relationship. I think there are some, masculinity is a huge and attitudes about men's place in relationship. Like that's a huge barrier. I think that they are also, I guess all of them connect back to masculinity because, like, as you say, being the protector, provider, like these stereotypes about what men should do, and so like they all connect back because, like, if you are expected to protect, you expect it to be stoic, like you can't show no emotions. Oh my goodness!
If you have to lead,
I can't believe everything always comes back to patriarchy.
Yeah. Masculinity, you can use different words. Patriarchy, machoism, it goes back to all of those. If you expect to lead in the home, a lot of times a leader isn't seen as a vulnerable person,
right? Unemotional person, which is why they say women can't lead, because they say we're emotional when all humans are emotional. Some are just socialized not to show it.
Right.
Yeah. One thing that I do want to add is that, in terms of the barriers, because we've talked about like how men are, how boys are raised, and how they become adults who don't show emotions and so on. But it's, I think, also important to mention that even in adulthood, it's basically like 360 degrees enforcement that men not be emotional. So it's like you get it from your male friendships, you get it from your female partners who also are like, you show sometimes a little softness and they're like, no, because you equate softness with women. And so how do we create, like, this parenting is one part of it, but how do we create supportive environments for men to be themselves?
So it goes back again to what you said. You use the 360 degree angle explanation for it. So I would say it's an all society approach. We touched on the parenting before. You mentioned friendships. A lot of us as men, we're in friendships, as you said, where we don't have the space to be emotional because your friend is going
unless
to
it's about football.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, sports.
Yes, but being emotional about your partner, your friend is going to think that you're soft. I'm not sure if it's a term that is used in town in the town area, but
well, yeah, it's in Bastille.
in St. Paul's, when someone is emotional about a woman, we say that they are wobbling.
Never heard it.
Right, and there's a negative connotation towards that, and so the narrative would have to change where men seek out friends who provide them with the space and the opportunity to be emotional. In relationships, there's some women who they would say it straight up, they don't want a man who appears as being soft, because it means that he's not good enough, or he's not strong enough.
Man.
Right. He's not strong enough. And so when it comes to women and what they're looking for in partners, they would also have to create that space, because as I said from the beginning, the research shows that similarly we are all emotional beings. And so they will have to create that space where a man is comfortable to express himself and not feel apprehensive because he might think that she might not want me anymore. And from a mental health perspective, I think that we just have to do our part in promoting campaigns and interventions that are geared towards decreasing the stigma that is that comes that is associated with men and their emotional side and their vulnerability.
I feel you 100%. I think that's so important, especially the friends part, because it's like, imagine like you basically fawning over somebody. You just met somebody that you really like, and you want to talk about how much you like, and your friends them like, well, what?
Yeah.
What is, and it's like, you know, you're forced to put on some kind of facade that maybe becomes more than a facade, and that is also trickling over into your relationship. So the girl is like, well, why did I do you? Why you're so tough? And oh my goodness. And of course, all of this, you know, affects people's intimacy and sex lives and, you know, their connectedness, and it's just a whole big mess.
I was gonna say I've heard real life examples of men, of females who would say that their partners would act different when they're around their friends. So they would act tough. They wouldn't be as affectionate as they would be when they're alone, and that comes from these individuals not wanting to look as soft, as too soft in front of their friends. Yeah,
like how they wouldn't even hug their friends, and it's so like. Anyways, that's another conversation for another day. This is a completely different, you know, topic, a shift in the conversation entirely. One of the big things, and I feel like I could venture to say Caribbean society, and not just, you know, Kittitian and Nuvision society, is infidelity, and just how normalized infidelity is by men. What would you say are some of those like psychological factors that contribute?
On the different attachment styles, and those are associated with your socialization during childhood. And attachment styles, they're more associated with your relationships with your parents who are growing up. So for example, you have secure, insecure, avoidant, and more that are not coming to my mind right now. So when it comes to insecure attachment style, that is when you grow up in a home where you feel as though your needs were not being met enough, and a lot of times what happens during your childhood, it transcends into your adulthood. So your personality traits, they are dependent on what happens in your childhood, and the research is there to show it. And so what happens with the insecure attachment style, when you get into an intimate relationship, if for example you're with someone and you feel as though your needs are not being met, and a lot of times it can be unrealistic also, and a lot of times it can
not communicated.
Right, I was just about to say that a lot of times it's that you're not effectively communicating that to your partner. And so with that insecure attachment style, many times it leads to some of us as men seeking out from other individuals outside of our intimate relationships. Another one that comes to mind is self-esteem and self-confidence. You know, as a young man with my friends, I know that was a big topic, the amount of girls that we would have, because in our mind that increases our self-worth, that makes us appear as a man. And so these are some of the factors that play into that. And then the second part to your topic Is it that if trust can be rebuilt?
Yeah, how can trust be rebuilt?
What I would say with that, is that it's dependent on the other person also. If they want to continue the relationship, and then if you want to, then it means that you're saying that you have forgiven that person, and so if you're forgiven that person, then the two of you have to work together to effectively rebuild that trust. When I say work together, the male also has to do his job to show that person that they have accepted accountability and they are willing to work on the issues, and the two of them have to work hand in hand and communicate effectively. It could also include having to go to therapy to work out the issues and get to the bottom of it. So that is what I think about. But some people might not want that. They might just be willing to end the relationship.
Can we make this a topic?
No.
No, not no. But another story. Remember you said you'd come back? Can we make
When
that
did
a
I
topic?
say that? I guess we can make it a topic.
Can we make it a topic? And you can bring a friend, a psychologist, counselor friend, if you want. I think that's definitely a worthwhile conversation to have, because I feel like infidelity is so normalized here. It's like, it's not even called infidelity. It's just a part of life at this point. Like, you know, I think people even expect their partners to have relations outside of their relationships that are supposed to be monogamous. So I would, yeah, if you're open to it. But anyways, we can talk about that
No problem.
another time. In terms of like men's mental health, which we don't talk about at all, and October is Mental Health Awareness Month,
Yeah,
isn't it?
Last week was actually World Mental Health Day.
Okay, yes. And next month we have International Men's Day, and I like in my job we work with men and boys, so like we talk about men a lot, and I love men in a that's what I mean.
No, I know what you mean.
I mean, I do love men. But you know, I'm surrounded by men and boys, and just like I love like women and girls, and you know, advocate for their being able to live and thrive, and have access to whatever they want to have access to and need to have access to. I feel like, you know, it's also a necessary conversation for men. So, which I also want men to take responsibility for having themselves too. So it's like, how can men, and I feel like, you know, with that protector provider thing, and you see it in, you know, single parent households with women who feel like they have to forget themselves essentially to take care of everybody else. I feel like men sometimes feel like they have to forget themselves too, you know, whatever it is they're dealing with, they have to push it aside because they have a family to take care of. How can men prioritize their mental health without stigma in impacting their relationships?
Yeah. I think there's so many facets.
And tell me how you prioritize your mental health as well. You're a student, you're a father, you're a husband, so yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I was gonna say what I said. That is why I was gonna say what I was about to say. In that there's so many angles to that question. Because yes, the man has to do that for himself, take initiative in doing that, but also his partner has to help him with that. And so to begin with that, your partner, his partner should also provide an environment where he's able to take breaks and prioritize his mental health. So like for example, a few years ago I had a client who he works at a very stressful job. I think he still works there. So yeah, he works at a very stressful job. And one of the things that he does when he gets home, and he still assumes the same roles, the leader, the protector. When he gets home, his wife would allow him to take an hour to himself in a room of his choosing in the house, take an hour to himself so that he can decompress from his busy work day. And I thought that was such a good thing, because I've never, until then I never came across any situation like that. And so in little ways like that, I think females can, or your partner can provide that environment for you. But also for yourself, you have to know when to switch off. So for example, when it comes to work and you get home, you have to know that is time for yourself and also your family, because having a proper work-life balance is also important. And so you asked about me. That's one of the things that I do. When I leave my job, for the most part, I'm able to switch off. Of course, I might think sometimes about a difficult client that I might have had throughout the day. But one of the things I've been able to do is knowing how to effectively switch off so that I'm available for my family. I guess I could say also, because I have a 9-year-old who is very busy, he assists me with that in terms of also holding me accountable. So he's very enthusiastic about football, so I have to make time to take him to football, to go on the field and play football with him, to watch football videos with him, because he's very enthusiastic about that. I also know that it's very important, apart from taking time for myself, to spend time with my partner, because that's very important in also prioritizing your mental health, because just having that time, and it's not even about sex, but just spending time and being in a physical space with your partner, I find that to be soothing. And so I think men should do that, take refuge in that. Also spend time with friends. Sometimes when you get in relationships and marriages, you're told that to become one. And so there's this notion that you should always be with your partner. But I think that there should be times where you can take breaks and be with friends and also other loved ones. And so I would say just knowing how to set boundaries for yourself. Also engaging in physical activity, because physical activity is very important, not just for your physical health, but it also helps in promoting mental wellness. And so I'm not sure if I answered the question, but those are some of the things I would suggest.
I don't think you answered the question. I think that, one thing I thought of as you said it, the first thing that you mentioned about like having a separate room to decompress, and so I was like, I hope the listeners aren't like going to go to their partners and insist that they give them.
No, it's whatever. I would say it's whatever works for you.
It's whatever works for you, but it's also like something that can be mutual, right? And that's like equitable. So it's not just that one partner gets an hour every day to decompress while the other partner is dealing with the chaos of home. Like, that's not, I just wanted to clarify, that's not what we're talking about here, it's just, especially if one person has a more stressful job than the other person, I think that's like, they say like relationships ain't always 50-50, sometimes it's 30-70 or whatever it is, where like, that's part of it.
most of the time it's not 50-50.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's almost never 50-50.
Right.
So it's like, it's understanding that. So it's so I just wanted to like
Right.
throw that in there for like people to
and maybe it was
get,
my bad for not giving the perspective of the wife also, because he allows her to have
her time. Yes.
It's just that we were talking about talking about men, and so
but you have to be so like specific, because because we're also talking, I think in this conversation we've also assumed like equity and like equitable relationships, but we haven't explicitly said this is the base, and on that base, like, here are some things that you can do. So I thought that it was important to interject that. So you're working towards an equitable base first, and then when you have that, then you can start to because otherwise a situation like that where it's like one partner just comes home and gets an hour while the other person, it builds resentment from the get-go.
So ladies and gentlemen, exactly what Roma said is what I was trying to articulate.
Which you did. Yes. And I just helped, clarified some things. I understood you perfectly, but I was like, just in case, let's add some more words.
I think that's a very important disclaimer in there.
That disclaimer, exactly. I feel like everything else, especially, the movement, and I was also thinking about like moving with your partner if you choose to go that route, like going for walks with your partner and things like that. And also the relationships with your friends, because I feel like that's so key. And we're talking about quality, healthy, good friendships.
Yeah, good friendships, yes.
So, your relationships with your friends, and not expecting your partner to be able to do everything and be everything for you.
Yeah.
And, putting to use your whole community, or putting to work your whole community.
That's another very important point. Not expecting your partner to do and be everything for you, because that's a very heavy burden for one person to have to be. So positive friendships and relationships are very important when it comes to that, and also knowing how to find your own happiness. I think that's very, very important in relationships for both men and women.
Yeah. I think Will Smith and a lot of people don't like Will and Jada, but I think there was one conversation they were having where they were like, I had to go away and maybe not make myself happy, but ensure that I was happy, like work on my own happiness instead of resting that happiness in somebody else, so that I can come to this relationship, like already in a good place. And that's not always, possible, but it's like, it's not like you are responsible for making me happy or making me sad. It's like I am responsible for that happiness, and when I am in my best, when I'm at my best, I am at my best for the relationship.
Yeah, and so that seeps into the conversation of self-care, taking care of yourself, looking after yourself, so that, as you said, you can be the best version of yourself for your partner. And so, I think men should take the initiative to do that, instead of always focusing on the rules that have been set and prescribed for them, so that they can be the best version of not just themselves for the partner, but if they want to continue to assume the role of protector and leader, be the best version of that.
Love that. And I think also, like, and I think you said this, work to define it in a way that works for you.
Yes.
Because it's also like being very realistic, very practical. Most men cannot be protectors and providers, like, in this economy.
Right.
So
exactly.
it's like, everybody in the home becomes a kind of protector,
right.
or at least a provider, and there's no sole provider. And I feel like that alone should ease some of the burden, but instead it seems to have like an opposite effect where it makes some men feel inadequate. Yeah. So I think all of that is part of it too, and of course, as I always say, it comes back to people's sexual relationships, because I feel like if you are feeling inadequate outside of the space where you have sex, it's probably going to trickle, into those spaces as well, and in the same way that something like not feeling the best in your body trickles into spaces like that. So I feel like it's also important for us to collectively, define.
Yeah. It sounds like you didn't need me to come here.
I mean, I absolutely needed you.
You're saying.
I think it's the conversation with you that is inspiring me to think in these ways, because I love men, but I don't like. There are not always opportunities to think about, the men's side. Or even like sometimes you want to have conversations about masculinity, and it's like all women having the conversation. So I appreciate definitely like your being here and being able to speak. I'm just talking as an observer.
Yeah.
You're talking as an experienced person.
Yeah, we can say that.
Yeah, as a man, plus as a person who has worked with men. So I appreciate your being here, for sure. And final question, and I feel like we kind of ended. You kind of like summarized it, but final question before we end the show. And we never took any break because the conversation was just continued. And this is, we talked about emotional intimacy earlier, and I think this is a good way to end a show about sex. But how can men cultivate emotional intimacy? And I think it's a good way to end the conversation because of all of the things that we've talked about around emotions, communication, vulnerability, and so on. How can men cultivate emotional intimacy in their relationships without it leading to sex? But and tell us what is the value of emotional intimacy.
Yeah, well, I actually think that once you have an environment where that is fostered, then it probably leads to sex in a positive way.
Yes.
Because if the female feels like her needs are being met in terms of intimacy, then of course she's going to want to engage in sexual activity. So to answer your question, I would say, and I think it's a very good question, because I don't think we think about that a lot, and I think a lot of times we associate intimacy with sexual intercourse, but as I said earlier, they're both different. So in terms of cultivating it, I think it's important that a man learns their partner. And when I say learn them, there's so many facets and different facets and angles to that too. But, learn their physical needs, learn their emotional needs, learn their psychological needs. And once you learn that, then you're going to be able to work on catering for all of that. Now, I know, granted, as we said, sometimes that is not easy for men. Because many of us were not raised that way. But once you learn what those needs are, then you're going to be able to be there wholeheartedly for your partner. And sometimes it's very simple. She comes home saying, I made this target today at work. I'm proud of you. She comes home saying, I'm feeling really tired. Can I give you a massage? She comes home and you go home and she says she's feeling really sad. Do you want to talk about it? How can I help? She says my needs are not being met. how can I be better? What can I do better to assist you in meeting your needs? And so I know some of this, it doesn't happen overnight, but once you're able to have that environment where you foster it and you practice it over and over, then it eventually becomes your norm.
Mm-hmm.
And then having that emotional awareness and being able to cultivate that level of emotional intimacy, then it leads to everything else good in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Even though it doesn't have to, because
Right.
I feel like, you know, that closeness cannot, like, should also suffice, right? Like,
Right.
closeness and intimacy, non-sexual intimacy are also important part
Right.
of relationship. But I was also curious about, so like, that's what men can do for their partners. How can men, because like there's something about how you show up, you know, in a relationship. So it's how you show up for your partner, but also how you show up. So do you think things like men volunteering information like that, so like also coming home and being like, I had a rough day, or I'm
Right.
feeling sad, or this news that I read about this accident really is bothering me. Do you think that can also help to
Yeah, that can
build
help.
intimacy? Yeah.
That can help. Because remember again, also a lot of times the expectation from some women are that men don't like to talk.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk. And if you're doing that, then you're doing your part in minimizing that misconception. And then you're doing your part in showing her that you're willing, vulnerable to her, you're willing to be yourself emotionally and psychologically naked to her. You're willing to bring down your walls for her. So yeah, that's a very good suggestion from you, Dr. Roma.
And that builds closeness too. And I only said it because like I was having a conversation with a friend today about, you know, becoming comfortable around each other. And it was like, you know, our bodies do things that we mostly do in private, but if you live with people, you know, it might come out. Like, for example, if you live with somebody, eventually you're going to have to use the bathroom while they're there. You're going to pass gas while they're there. You know, different things like that. And I feel like even those things can help to build intimacy, because it shows like I'm comfortable.
Yeah, all of that is a part
around you.
Yeah, all of that is a part of the vulnerability aspect that I spoke about. Because if you're going to be real with someone, there's no way you can keep up that facade forever.
Right. Yeah.
It's just like when you go for a job interview, you're working to impress these people, but over time you get the job, then you break some of those walls are broken down, and your employers, they get to know the real you. And it's the same thing in a relationship. When you first meet each other, for the most part, you're trying to impress each other, but after that, the walls are supposed to come down. And so all of those things that you're not comfortable doing around other people, if you care about that person and if the relationship is genuine, then
they will come out.
it shouldn't matter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for affirming the comfort.
And I think I think that is more so my personal perspective. So that isn't a part of any of my training, but I think that is how
I
it should
think
be.
that, and I'm pretty sure like there is research that will show that. Do you have any final words, any summary that you want to share to the listeners, the viewers?
I would say that I enjoy this conversation very much, and I think it's a conversation that is timely, considering what our society is like, and I think that it will take an all hands on deck approach to change the narrative about men and emotional sensitivity and how they operate within relationships. Some of our men, they might also be dealing with trauma, and that also affects their ability to properly show up in relationships. And so I would just like to put a plug in there and say, if you're dealing as a man, or anyone in general, if you're dealing with any deep psychological or psychiatric clinical issue, the National Counseling Center, we're there for you. You can call us at 465-5000. We have a bunch of clinicians who are there and who are qualified and able to assist you with overcoming your mental health issues.
And next time you come, we'll talk about what did I say we'll talk about? Infidelity. But I think it could also be useful to talk about some of those issues that people might call the counseling center for, because I feel like people diminish like this seriousness of what they're dealing with, and they're like, oh, especially if they know people who have gone through it too. It's like, oh, that's just life or whatever. So I think that's also, we don't always only have to talk about sex. So there's also a space that's open to the
as I explicitly tell you, that's not my area of expertise. So
well, I'll bring it in. That's me. I'll bring it in. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I think I'm definitely looking forward, savoring this one, and also looking forward to the next one that we'll have. And I hope that folks listening, especially the men, were able to take something from this conversation. And remember, you can watch it again tomorrow. You can share the link with your friends in case anybody missed it while it was live, and let people know that Pleasure Pulse is back on. I'm back. We are back to having these conversations every Tuesday night. Thank you so much for joining me. As usual, I'm wishing you a pleasurable evening, and I will see you next Tuesday.